Good afternoon, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Fran and I decided to do the green background today to go with St. Patrick's Day. We had a different one that we thought about, but it was a little overwhelming. So we hope that you're okay with this color green. And
Yes.
Fran has her green on. I've got my green on. I've already gotten pinched today, by
Really?
the way, because I didn't have this on at that time. I wasn't even
Ah.
out of bed yet. And Kevin pinched me, and I was like, "What was that for?" He's like, "You don't have green on." Well, okay. I said,
So in
"Well,
the future, you need to wear green jammies the day previous, huh?
apparently, but my eyes are green," and that's what I told him. And he said, "Well, they were closed." And I'm like, "Well, then it's not fair either." So anyway, thank
Ah,
you for anyone who is joining us. This is Friday with Fran. This is Fran.
you did it.
I am Shelley. And we just get on here once a week or so, and we just talk about things related to special education, raising children with disabilities, being a person with a disability. As you can tell by my background, I'm the special education perspective, and Fran brings us the other perspectives. And so, yeah, sometimes we have really, great topics to talk about, and we have like a clear path. And then other days like today, we're not really sure where we're going. So we invite you to come along on our crazy journey
Yeah.
with us.
I
So, how are you, Fran? That was a big sigh.
am. You know, I want to start this with how did you think about Violet's future?
Uh,
What
well,
plans did you make?
well, I mean, there were several steps, several different times of thinking about her future. Um, so, like, within weeks of her being born, we bought her a life insurance policy. We made sure that our wills, within probably a year or so of her being born, were representative of the fact that, if we were to die, that she would need guardians. Um, we started putting money aside for whatever
Hmm.
purpose she would want to use it. Um, and, anticipating that at some point she would leave home, be married, give us grandchildren, have a productive life that she felt was purposeful.
Hmm.
Mm, I think that covers most of it.
Yeah. Would you say that's probably pretty typical of most parents? That with their children.
I think so. There might be other things included, like, I mean, I was giving, a big
Hmm.
overview. There were probable times where, like, okay, she, like when I was pregnant with her, like, she's going to walk, she's going to talk, she's going to meet all of her milestones, she's going to be good at school, she's going to, maybe be involved in extracurricular activities. I don't know that I had any specific sport or extracurricular in mind. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, um, yeah, have friends, be social.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
how does that compare to how you pictured or thought about your kids' futures?
Well, how I thought they would occur prior to their birth varies greatly from how I've prepared for their future once they were born.
Mm-hmm.
So, which part would you like me to answer of that?
If you don't mind, I would like you to do B parts, both
Okay.
parts, because I think that's an interesting. um, shift that had to happen for you. And I don't think that people who don't have to make that shift really understand it.
So I, much like you, had plans that they would reach their developmental milestones, that they would be involved in sports of some kind, probably active, have lots of friends, and just be independent human beings that would go on about life and do things that they wanted to do in life, and probably have husband or a wife for each of my son and daughter. And had hoped for grandkids, much like you. Um, and that all changed when my son was born. He was put into the NICU right away, and then my hope and desire was that he would live.
Right.
That became my focus, and then helping him reach those milestones, developmental milestones, became my focus. But in the meantime, while that was my focus, I had to plan for a future that I couldn't even perceive how it would be.
Mhm.
But I was expected to plan this future and to be able to meet his needs in the future. And then I had my daughter, and I all along I had really planned on having another child that would help out with my son, be that sibling that was just there and went through life with him, not side by side, but helping him out, just
Right.
being a helper. And well, there were other plans, and my daughter as well has unique and special needs. Um, she wasn't critical health wise in the beginning. Sorry, my cat is walking back and forth.
That's
Uh,
okay.
but she has her own set of challenges. And then I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. She's not going to be able to help out with her brother because she
Hmm.
needs help herself. And which was fine. It didn't upset me, but I had to again reboot and shift directions. And it was kind of like a really, really quick hairpin turn reshift. It wasn't an opportunity to gradually go, oh, well, life might be just a little bit different for my daughter. So, no, life is going to be extremely different. And being her mom, I wanted to help her reach the fullest potential she could. And just as I did with my son. So, I had to reboot and go, okay, well, how do I do that? What do I do? And I had to find all these resources. Thankfully, because of my son, I had some resources, but she needed other resources. So it was there was never a moment's rest. It's and the reason I was had mentioned to you today when you had reached out to me was I'm realizing there are some things that are critical that I do like ASAP that haven't even really been on my radar, but they're important for both of my kiddos.
Hmm.
So I and it felt like a really heavy weight and burden
Yeah.
because sorry, Emmy got hair in my face. Um,
She's
but
cracking me up how she keeps sticking her head into the. I mean, I know she doesn't realize she's doing it, but
well,
sticking her
she's
head into
literally
the view of
sitting on the
the
desk directly in front of my view of you, so I like have a cat view. But so it's this heavy weight that I'm feeling right now because I want to do what's right and I want to do what's best for my kids.
camera. Right.
And I don't know if I don't have the knowledge to do it, so I have to figure out what the resources are, and but I don't want to make a mistake in the process. So it, there's a lot of trepidation with this realization that there's some things I got to do. So that's kind of the difference I would say in you and me and our futures with our kiddos.
Yeah, and I think you're very typical for parents who have children with disabilities, and I think I'm fairly typical for parents who have children that are quote unquote typically developing. And I, I do have experiences with more than just you. I mean, that's a lot of what I learned about when I did the interviews for the book, is that that is something that a lot of parents who have children with disabilities or who are eligible for special education, that was kind of the reason for the book, was to share how
Right.
similar but different. I mean, we're in overarching terms, we're still planning and thinking about our children's future, but how that looks for the child is very different.
It
And
reminds me of a statement that a mom once said, "I hope to live one more day longer than my child."
yeah, and honestly, that is not something that I have really thought about. You know, in I think the typical belief of life, we go before our children go because we're older.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we don't expect to live past our children. Um, but I've heard that statement multiple times. Again, interviewing the families for the book, because that
Hmm.
is a huge concern. And that's not necessarily, I mean, yeah, like I said, we bought a life insurance policy for Violet when she was born, but I mean, I really didn't anticipate ever having it come back to us. And unfortunately, that is a reality for many parents who have a child with a disability.
So, but moving forward, because I don't want it to be so dreary. I mean, it is that is the reality.
Right.
But how can we help those who are in this reality? What can we do? Like, I mean, resources. What resources are out there?
Yeah. And I mean, when we talked about what topic we wanted to cover, and you mentioned yours, planning for the unknown, I thought, well, that kind of fits in with what my thought had been, which was finding resources. Because it does seem so difficult, you know, I don't know if it really is. And I really honestly think that the organizations that have the resources think they're everywhere. I mean, I say that about myself. Like, oh, if somebody asks me how they can find me, like, oh, I'm on YouTube and I'm on Facebook and I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'm like, I'm everywhere. But for somebody to know to look me up that
Hmm.
doesn't know that I'm a resource, how do they find me? You know, I mean, yes, my Google is on business. I mean, my business is on Google. um, but again, how do people know about me? How do they find me? And it's the same thing, I think, with so many resources. And there's so many things that we need, when we're planning for the unknown future. So, you know, just thinking about it, like, okay, for your situation, um, you may need to do more than just a will. You might need to have a special needs trust. But looking at, well, you know, if somebody doesn't even has never heard those three words, special needs trust, they don't know that that might be something they want to look into.
And then on top of it, there's even different types of special needs trusts.
Right. Or something that you've had to do that I didn't have to do is the guardianship
Hmm.
process. You
Yes.
know, so you need lawyers in both of those situations. So how do you find lawyers who, I mean, the lawyers are everywhere, it seems like, but how do you find the one or a couple that you get to choose from and say, well,
Right.
I read this person's bio and I read this person's bio and I don't really like this one, so I'm going to go with this one. I mean, sometimes you don't even get the choice. It's like, well, this is the only person specializing in that area or who has even a little bit of practice of that area. Um, so I mean, I hate to be facetious, but I mean, Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo and all of the internet ways to search everything. But then too, like I said, sometimes you have to come up with the right words. I mean,
Yeah, if you don't even have the words, how can you search?
Right. If you don't know what you're supposed to be searching for, how do you do that? So like I'm getting much better at searching online, but I used to be horrible at it. I mean, I could spend hours trying to figure like, okay, well, it wasn't that word. Well, let's try it with, this perspective, or let's throw this word in there. And I've gotten better about like, okay, these are the words I'm going to search for to hopefully niche down what it is that I really want to know about. But yeah, I mean, I think it can be kind of daunting. And I've thought of that with my own website. Like, can I put a page that just has resources on it? But then I know other organizations that do that. And, so then I think, well, is that necessary for me to do it? Or should I just direct people to these other pages? Or, I mean, we have access to so much more information now than we've ever had in our history. And yet it seems like people are even more lost than what they've ever been.
Because there's so much information now.
Yeah.
That you have to sort through it to find that needle in the haystack.
Right.
At least that's what I think.
No, I think you're right. I think it's overwhelming to people now. I mean, I think it was overwhelming before to think, oh, I'm going to have to go to the library, or I'm going to have to, for anybody who's, young, look in the phone book. There was this book that we had and you had to search it by alphabetical or by business type. And, and then you could find some names of people in your area and their phone numbers. But yeah, I mean, that was overwhelming, but I think, or that was difficult. I think now it's difficult and overwhelming.
Yes, I agree.
So what are you doing? And maybe you haven't been able to take a step down the road yet, but for these things that you felt like, oh my goodness, I need to really start getting these things completed.
Well, I put them on a list so that they wouldn't get forgotten.
Yep.
They wouldn't get pushed aside because they're urgent. And then I started the Google search and I was like, oh, because a thing that I'm working on is a third-party trust. Because I can't have just a special needs trust, and I can't have, I know that much, but finding someone that can help me do that is knowledgeable and trustworthy is the hard part, because there's lots of firms that say, yeah, we do trust, da 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 da. Yeah, but not many do special needs trust. And so that's on my list. That one's been on my list, but I'm finally attending to it. And it's like, oh my goodness gracious. And then on top of it, with my disability with numbers, it just overwhelms me to even think about it. Every time I think about a trust, I get very anxious because I'm like, oh great, we're going to be talking about numbers. Oh great, we're talking about numbers. I'm done. And then I put it aside because I can't do numbers.
Right.
So I have to deal with my anxiety and insecurities with numbers to even start the process that's necessary for my daughter's trust.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of a snippet of what's on my horizon, but I'm kind of tabling it till I get back from my mission trip. I'm like, okay, and then I will bear down and really focus on it.
And it is, there's, I think some of it that is that head game of, okay, I know this is going to be tough. I know this is going to be daunting, but I've got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, just Kevin and I did our trusts recently and updated our wills because Violet doesn't need guardians anymore. So, getting everything in line that way. And for anybody who thinks, oh my gosh, you've got so much money that you are going to have a trust. No, we don't have that much money, but for us, a trust was necessary versus just having a will. But knowing the difference between the two took research, and it took, talking to different people and then digesting it and then going, I didn't understand that. And then talking to that person again and having that person tell me again, like, okay, this is what a trust is, and this is how it's different, and this is why it might be of benefit. And, so knowing that it could be multiple visits or multiple conversations.
And having the time to do those multiples.
Right.
Because a lot of times, as a parent of kiddos with special needs, you don't have the time. You have to somehow cleave out time out of thin air or something to do what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. And I can't imagine that that's easy because, I mean, I'll be honest. From the time Kevin and I started on it until the time we finally signed everything and it was completed was all the calendars. Now, part of that was and probably the biggest part of that was the first lawyer that we were going to use, unfortunately, had a very big medical incident happen, and they were unable to do anything for months, for several calendars. And so it was just put on hold. Once we finally said, okay, we've got to take this off of this lawyer's plate and let that lawyer relax a little bit and not have to worry about us. And we moved to a different lawyer. Then it was, just a matter of maybe B or C calendars.
Okay.
But then it was on ours because it was like, okay, I know that there's a lot of documents and reading all the documents. And I very much am a kind of person that if I'm going to put my name to something, I want to make sure that I have the best understanding of it as possible. Do I understand everything that's in it? No. Can I tell you, everything that we've set up without having it right in front of me? No. But as I went through it, I made sure, okay, this makes sense to me, or this section doesn't make sense to me. Or, I mean, there were words in there. And this is what I tell people that consider hiring a master IEP coach or an IEP coach at all is we know the wording. We know the steps. We know what things mean. So it's just like me hiring the lawyer, and I have to trust her. And she is someone who I have met and known and have done some work with before. And so I felt like I could trust her. And, it's like, she knows all the words. She knows what all that stuff means in regards to all of the ins and outs of the law when it comes to personal finances and real estates and, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's finding someone that you connect to and that and I mean, they have to make a really good first impression. I mean, there's a lot of pressure for the lawyer, because if they don't make that good first impression, you could walk away and go find somebody else.
Right.
even though if you'd given them 2 times or 3 times, B or C times, maybe
Hmm.
you could have found that they would be great for you, but you know, like you said, we don't have the time, and if they don't offer any kind of free consultation, you don't have the money necessarily either.
Right.
So yeah, I mean it's it took days for me to go, okay, you've got to work on this today, you know. And I literally had to carve time and say, all right, from this time to this time, I'm going to read through as much as I can and type out my questions for the lawyer, and then the next day I'll
Hmm.
do it from this time to this time. And you have to give yourself grace when you're doing that too, or at least I did.
Yeah, you do. And so what I'm hearing you say is you broke it down into workable chunks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I have to say about being a parent of special needs kiddos. You're always having to break it down into workable chunks because you're not going to have long extended times. You've got to do your chunks and prioritize what you do in those chunks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you said that that's actually one of the things that's on your plate. Are there other things? And you don't have to tell me what the things are, but I mean, are there more things that are on your shoulders right now that you've like said, oh, I gotta like take care of
Yeah,
this right away?
there's be more critical things that have to happen because I realized if I suddenly passed away, my kiddo's future is not planned out well enough that they're going to be okay.
Hmm.
And I had to really look at it, and I tried to prioritize because there's lots of things that, but what can I plan? I had to say what can I um, have a contingency for, and I realized there's these couple of things that I really need to do because if I did pass away, their future is very uncertain
Gotcha.
from what would desire for them to happen for them.
Right.
And one is, yes, you had mentioned it. I had gotten guardianship of both of my kiddos, um, and my daughter has a co-guardian, but my son does not. But they each have a line of successor guardians,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I didn't know about. But thankfully, the attorney that I went to talked about it, and this was prior to my health changing and my disabilities happening.
Right.
Um, with my son, with my daughter, all the disabilities had happened.
Right.
So I realized that my son probably needs a co-guardian along with the line of successors,
Gotcha.
but
Okay.
someone that could walk alongside right now
Right.
and see what I'm doing so that if something happens. So, but I thought I had planned. I
Right.
thought I had planned well when I set up my son's guardianship. But now I've realized, oh, yeah, my health changed. So there was that curveball and it changed.
Right.
I mean, I don't fault myself, I don't blame myself, but I
Okay.
know that there's things that need to be changed and need to be done soon. And I think that's important to realize is always to be balancing your list of because what you think is a priority might not be a priority when something else happens, and to give yourself, like you said, the grace
Mm-hmm.
and the flexibility. And, because I used to be a very rigid person, and, and I had no flexibility at all in my own life, let alone my kiddos' lives or anything else. And so, but I've learned that I have to, for my own self-preservation, have to be flexible,
Mm-hmm.
and how much easier life is because of that.
Right.
Okay, so
Please do.
I've told you about my cat being an untrained emotional support cat, right?
Yes.
Yes, and she has been glued to my chest and giving me much attention because she's aware that I'm in need of her
Yeah.
without me being aware that I'm in need of her. Hence why she's in the picture and in the in my face.
Yeah. Well, that's good though. That's good that she has that sense that she knows that her mommy, her owner needs her a little extra cuddling today. And
So,
so I'm glad that you are providing yourself that grace, and that you're not saying, "Oh, I should have known," or "Oh, I should have," because honestly, that's not productive. And I mean,
right.
it's very easy for me to say, "Well, that's not productive," but there are so many things in our lives that are easy to say and so much more difficult to put into practice.
Hmm.
I mean, and I'm guilty of it myself. You know, I beat myself up sometimes about things that, well, why didn't you know this? Or why didn't you do it sooner? Or why, and that doesn't help me move forward.
Hmm.
So, when you have a situation, and I really appreciated what you said right off the top of this conversation was I wrote it down so that it was on a list for me to do. It won't get overlooked. And not everybody is a list person, but
Hmm.
I do think for myself, when I get it out of my brain and I put it on paper, just that action.
Uh-huh.
And I do think that I think I've read this somewhere that there is actual science behind that that eases your brain a little bit because then you're
Yeah,
right, like, okay, that piece of paper is holding it for me now. I don't have to.
right.
But then
I have
also,
a friend that's done has told me that. Write it down. Get it out of your brain.
yeah. And so not just that part of doing it for that reason, but for me, if it's on a list, I'm going to do it because I want to be able to cross it off the list.
Hmm.
Again, that's my personality. That's not everybody's personality. Some people are starters, but not finishers. They go around starting projects all the time, but they don't have that same drive to finish the product or the project. I mean, uh,
Hmm.
where I'm like, no, if it's I got to do it. If I start it, I got to finish it. And it does. It kind of like gives me that extra. I know it's just ink on a paper, but it's that motivation that, like, no, you got to get that done.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be done immediately. It's not like write it down and then quickly cross it off. But I mean, it depending on how big the thing is, it can be days or weeks or all calendars. you know but because it's written down, it's always on my kind of like, oh yeah, I got to do that. I can work on that a little bit. And again, science behind that. I mean, that's why they say to have, like, if you have a business or if you want to um, have a certain way of life, that you do those vision boards
Hmm.
so that you can see, this is what I'm working toward. This is what I want to make happen in my life. And again, I mean, apparently it's other people are motivated by that as well, not just me. So,
Yeah,
but again,
that's
you got to take time and do those kinds of things.
right. So I wanted to make a toolbox.
Oh boy. Okay, I got to get a piece of paper. All right. Or do you want to write the tools down? Because
No, you
I
can
hardly
write them.
ever put them into an actual toolbox graphic.
I know, but you can write them because your writing is much better than faster than mine.
Okay. I was going to say, how do you know that my writing is better?
I don't know if your writing is better, but it's probably faster because I can't read my writing anymore these days.
Oh, well, and you also have a cat that is,
That is nudging me.
yeah.
So I'd like to think of what are some resources we can put in our toolbox for those who happen to be walking this journey of raising a kiddo with special, unique needs.
What are some items you've had in your toolbox?
Early intervention. That set me up set my son up greatly for future care, for improvement in reaching some of his developmental milestones, but also they gave me resources of people that I could contact for different needs that we were experiencing at that time. I think that's a very missed resource. So that's why I wanted to mention it.
Okay. So actually, I've taken two things out of there: the early intervention and then the people and business resources.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Those are tools now. I mean, we can, go deeper into what those resources might look like, but
I think we'll just keep going with the tools.
Yeah.
Unless it's kind of vague, and then maybe we'll
Right.
address it. How does that sound?
Yep, sounds perfect. That was exactly my thought. So what
We're
other
on the
things?
same page.
I know. Yeah, literally. No. So what are some other resources? I mean, other toolboxes? Blah, blah, blah. Let me try that again. What other tools do you have in your toolbox that you have used or that you would recommend?
I would recommend when your child reaches school age that you get someone that understands the IEP process.
I would very much agree to that.
I was hoping you would agree to that. I did not have that resource. It did not exist when I started the process. And in fact, it was my daughter who finally benefited from that resource in high school. So it's an evolving resource, and it's a powerful one. So I think that that's an important resource to have in our toolbox.
So I have generalized that to find someone who has knowledge that you don't.
Okay.
Because it can go for a lot of things. But if we need to make it more specific, like find someone who has IEP knowledge, find someone who has guardianship knowledge, find someone who has,
Maybe you could do like an IE guardian IEP finances under
right.
it. Does that work?
Sure. Okay.
And I had another one and it just went.
I'm sorry.
Whoosh. No, it's okay.
Have an emotional support animal? Is that?
No, that one just walked away finally. And now I have more
okay.
hair up my nose. So she's a fuzzy emotional support animal. What was it?
Don't do it alone.
I know what it was.
What?
Networking.
No, there. See, that kind of tied together with what I just said, but
yeah, it did. Because developing a network, it says that we've communicated often about these subjects and have similar thought processes. That's my go on that. But networking, it is important to never think that you're supposed to go it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And not allow your pride to get in the way of meeting others.
Right.
And I say that from personal experience, that pride thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It got me nowhere. So do you have anything you'd like to add? I mean, I've got a wealth of them, but you can add in.
Well, I think you should keep going because this is a toolbox that you have carried around for years. Anything that I might say, I don't know that it would necessarily be a useful tool. So I'd rather get
from those that you wrote in your book, what maybe something that you found overarching throughout their stories, something there.
Trust your gut.
Yeah. It's a good one. Whether it's with a medical something, whether it's with school, whether it's just life in general.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think that there's something missing or something else that you should be doing, then, or something that other people should be doing, then keep asking until that feeling goes away.
Yeah.
And we say this a lot. give yourself grace for
Mm-hmm.
knowing what you know in the moment and then learning differently later.
Yeah. I laugh. I used to give talks to first year medical students
Mm-hmm.
out at the university in St. Louis, and I thought I knew what all of was raising a kiddos with special needs, and so here I was spouting off all these things, and I looked back at it, and I looked at the presentation the other day. I was like, huh, that was just a snippet. I didn't even touch, but that's what I knew at the time.
Right.
So I like that.
Yep.
I think another resource that's been in my toolbox is realizing all the government resources out there, because there are a variety. So, and I take that differently than other resources because there's ones that you really should tap into.
Such as, can you think of any examples?
Well, Social Security Administration, um, your local Department of Human Resources for help with insurance or food, or um, there's resource centers that help with um, finding housing, because I had that crisis of need that was never in my radar. My son was going to live with me the rest of his life because I was always going to live a day more. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was going to live with me the rest of his life. But he lives in a group home now because he needed to be there for himself, and I needed him to be there for myself.
Right.
And that doesn't, and I want to say that doesn't make you a failure as a parent if you
Absolutely not.
cannot keep your child home with you, because it has so benefited my daughter in ways that she never would have received the focus, the attention, the parenting, because I had to focus in other areas on my son. But now I can parent both of them much better.
Well, and speaking of people from the book, James's story, I mean, his mom, she didn't have to for safety reasons or financial reasons. She wanted to for her son's sake because he was going to have a much better social life
Yes.
being in the group homes than he would with her and her husband. So, you know, I mean, she, and also for her, and it's talked about in the book that she anticipates going before her son. And so she didn't want that, for him to have two difficult things to deal with at the same time, losing her
Hmm.
and losing his home. So, you know, for her, that was a decision that she had come to when he was just, you know, like right out of high school almost.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and something became available and they, you know, it worked out for them. It might not work out for everybody, you know,
Right.
and he doesn't live close by her. I think they are, well, at one time they were further apart than they are now, but you know, it was at like a one time around the clock distance away.
Uh-huh.
Um, but like I said, she thinks he has a much better life where he is compared to what she would be able to give him, because there's just so many things that
Right.
he gets to do that during the day where she has to be at work. And if he was living at home, he wouldn't be able to do anything during the day. And she may not be able to work during the day, depending on, you know, his needs. And so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely pros and cons. And I do not envy anyone who has to go through that decision-making process.
It's taken me this many, all the calendars to
Mm-hmm.
really, really be okay
Yeah.
with that decision. And I am now. I can honestly say I'm good. It's good.
Yep. Yeah.
So
So are there any other government resources that, because you mentioned Social Security, local Department of Human Resources, insurance, food, housing, or do you,
I
are you,
think I
okay.
think that was all that was really on my head at that time.
Okay. Any other toolbox items that you've used or can think of that would be good that maybe you haven't had or that you didn't need because of your situation that someone else might need?
Well, I know that we've had to have a really good medical team.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that we tapped all the medical resources possible to help my kiddos be as healthy as possible. I don't know if that's truly a toolbox resource, but unto itself, or if it's combined with something.
Right. Well, and you know, in the areas where we live, it's very common for us to drive all the way around a clock to get the
Hmm.
resources that we're talking about. But there are many people who that's so very ridiculous to them that they would have to drive that far.
Uh-huh.
And they're not necessarily willing to do it.
Oh,
And
okay.
I I worry about that um, because I do think that if there's some place that you can drive to that's, I mean, I know the gas prices right now are high, but they've definitely come down, and I know that just the amount of time it takes, because it's not just the once around the clock to get there, then it's the amount of time while you have the appointment, and then it's the once around the clock to get back home, and people need to work. Um, but I think sometimes, and I don't know, maybe I'm because it's not my situation, but we have to try to figure out how to make that work
Yeah,
and be willing to do that.
true.
So I don't know if that's a toolbox item or not. Going outside your comfort zone, maybe, or
Yeah.
expanding your comfort zone. So I think that might be part of some of these other things too, is, you know, asking for help. That's very far out of a
Will
lot of people's comfort zones.
willing to do it no matter the cost. So I think that ties into outside of your comfort zone, and because it's not always easy. I'm not trying to paint this dreary picture, but it's not always easy. There's tears, there's anger, there's frustration, there's anxiety, all tied into, but there's joy and there's happiness and there's compassion and love
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
It's just you feel it to an extreme in each of those areas. You tend not to have the mild moments, but you have the extreme,
Right.
the celebration that your child was able to handle a bottle without losing it everywhere.
Right.
That celebration is an extreme after watching them dwindle away because they couldn't eat with fear of a feeding tube being put in.
Right.
So you just have extremes when you're in this world.
Yep. Yeah. And again, I don't have the personal experience that you do, but I'm thinking about Kathleen in the book, because
Hmm.
her mom was very diligent about making sure to count how many ounces of nutrition she was receiving, and she was I don't remember if she was a nurse at the time or not. She's not a nurse. She's a um, lab technician. But just being extremely diligent of like how much input,
Mm-hmm.
how much output. And Kathleen was born with a cleft lip and cleft palate, so
Uh-huh.
it literally had to be drops at a time, because otherwise, and she had acid reflux, or not acid, was it acid reflux or regurgitation issue, something where,
Uh-huh.
depending on the position that she was in, she might, spit it all back out. Um, and so even after all the effort that she put into it, eventually it's still, they said that Kathleen was having failure to thrive.
Uh-huh.
And how devastating that was to her mom to hear that, because she had been so careful about everything. And so I think that is maybe part of it too, is taking, I don't want to say outsiders' opinions, but outside experts.
Trusted experts.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, because as I'm continuing to think about her story, then the medical field let her down because not that they gave her bad advice, but that they gawked at Kathleen, and they treated her more like a science experiment than a person sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Man, I feel like you're talking about my story with my son.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, that, to me that, yes, I happen to know the both of you, and you're two different people, but if I have two different people that have two very different situations, that just tells me that there is a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
that feel the way that you and Kathleen's mom feel. And I have to keep referring to her as Kathleen's mom because I want to say her real name, and I don't remember what I called her in the book. So
I understand. I figured that's where you were with that. So, would you like to summarize our toolbox resources and go over them for us, please?
sure.
Because I think we've hit a pretty detailed list.
Yeah, and I have to figure out how to say number 10, the one that we were just talking about. Maybe because it's the one about trusting, and listening to other people, but I don't want to say you have to do that. So maybe seriously consider other outside people's advice.
Weigh the advice of outside experts.
There we go. Okay. Weigh the advice of outside experts with your gut. Or against your gut, I guess that would be. Because sometimes the outside experts are still wrong. So I know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know that I'm still. So anyway, well, I'll read through what we have. So that made 10, by the way. So we've got early intervention, finding people and business resources, getting someone who has knowledge that you don't, whether that is IEP knowledge, guardianship knowledge, special needs trust, or financial types of things. Networking, don't be prideful. Look out for those other people. Reach out to those other people. You're not doing it alone. Trust your gut. Give yourself grace for not knowing what you know now. Utilizing government resources that are out there, and like Social Security Administration, your local departments of public health, your local departments of health resources and human resources, insurance, food, housing. We talked about some of the other examples. Seeking out different medical opinions and different medical solutions. Maybe having to drive to someplace different, or say to your family doctor, I love you, but we need more than what you can provide, or we need a different opinion, or I just, whatever it is. And with that one comes the next one of dealing outside your comfort zone sometimes, whether that is speaking up when you don't feel comfortable speaking up, or driving someplace that maybe you don't feel comfortable driving because of the distance, or that you don't think you should have to, and there should be services closer to you, whatever it is. And then weigh that advice that is given to you by those experts, and even well-meaning outsiders who don't know your situation, against your gut, and see if maybe there is something valuable in what someone else has said.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's a good list. And when I was thinking about that last one, nobody likes critique or criticism. And I certainly speak for myself on this one. If somebody tells me something that I take negatively, I'm not happy about it. However, I do go back and think about it. Like, is there something from what they said that I could do to improve a situation, or myself, or my approach to something, or how I speak to people, or, whatever it is. And I don't change every time someone gives me feedback that I receive as negative. But if I see it as something that can improve, then I do.
Mm-hmm.
I may not have liked where it came from, but that's not the point. The point is to improve. So,
okay. Yeah.
So that's it. And our time is up.
Is it?
Yeah. We only have this many little times around the clock before we're totally up. So do you have anything you want to close with, or do you think going over our list was a good closing?
I think that was a good closing. And then just in this world, just realize you're never alone, that there's always somebody you can reach out to. There's numbers you can dial or text, and there's resources, as we've talked about, but there's resources out there. So don't despair, but reach out.
Yeah. And I just realized I never put down to write it down when you're doing your toolbox of planning.
Yeah.
The unknown is to write it down that you need to address something. All right. Next Friday, you leave for your missions trip, right? So we won't have Friday with Fran.
Yeah, it's going to end the following B. I'll be gone on the mission trip.
Okay. All right. So then we will see everybody in 3 weeks. See everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oops, I missed.